Hi friends, Molten here and welcome back to my JTGM series. So in my previous video I went through the steps and preparation I did in order to get ready for my trip to get my final 2 Grandmaster norms. This was my best played game in the first tournament on that trip, which was the Qatar Masters, an absolutely fantastic event, and also the first event I believe Carlsen played as an open tournament in a long time. It was also in this particular game I got to play one of my favorite players, which was Daniel Dubov. So I hope you enjoyed the game and I'll see you in the video. So before I get into the chess, I'll tell you the story and how I was feeling leading up to the game. But if you're not interested in that, you can just use the timestamp below to jump straight into the game. So as you know, I went on this trip and this was the first tournament, the Qatar Masters, which I chose, a big international open event, and the first one Carlsen was playing in a long time, and that attracted a list of very strong players. But I enjoy playing in big open events because you would not otherwise get to meet or play such players, so this was very interesting for me and part of the appeal of chess. But I had a very bad start to this tournament. I scored like 1 out of 4. Mind you, it was a very strong event and I played some very strong players in those rounds, but still I had one really bad game in round 4, which was very awful, I felt at the time, and this put me in a really bad mood. Now when this happens, a number of things can take place. You can go on tilt and your whole entire tournament will get ruined. That is not what you want to happen. For me, when I feel like something like this is affecting my actual play and my thoughts, then I was trying to take a step back from the board. I'll maybe do something non-chess related just to sort of clear my head so I can come back focused. So luckily I didn't quit chess or do anything extreme like that. I just came back the next day and I managed to get a win against a 2350 rated player, and I felt like that was a good played Khan game, so I was quite happy. And the following day I managed to score a nice win against slightly higher rated IM. So I was quite happy with the recovery there, which led me to my third game, which was against Daniel Dubov, very strong 2650 plus Grandmaster at the time. And this is where I started to sort of second guess myself again. And in my preparation before the event, I had actually looked at a lot of the open Sicilian lines, especially the classical Sicilian lines, but for some reason before this particular game I was having second thoughts, like should I be playing into this particular variations which I previously looked at, because my opponent's like an expert in the classical Sicilian. Maybe I should be deviating and playing something completely different. And I was going back and forth with this for a while, and then I realized like I'm not sure what I'm doing. I should just stick with what I know, which is the advice I always give. And so I ended up going to the board. Luckily I stuck with what I learned previously, and I went for an open Sicilian. So the game started e4 c5, knight f3, pawn to d6, d4, pawn takes, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, and knight to c6, starting off the classical Sicilian variation. And I had looked at a lot of Dubov's games before because I regard him as one of the best classical Sicilian players in the world, and so I was quite familiar with the lines and what he played beforehand. But of course he has a lot of variety and choice to choose from. Here I chose the move bishop to g5. We have the move pawn to e6, queen to d2, a6. So this is one of the main lines of the Richter-Rauser variation. Bishop to e7, played pawn to f4, bishop to d7, knight to f3, pawn to b5. So this is a very topical variation. After the move bishop takes, he has to take back with the g pawn because his d pawn was undefended. And now the variation continues, pawn to f5. And here the very topical line continues, queen to b6, and after king to b1, castles, g3, white usually takes, plays bishop h3, and black plays the move knight to a5 to try and hop the knight into the c4 square. But in the game, After the move pawn to f5, my opponent avoided all this with the move knight to e5. I was quite happy with this because I was going to probably avoid this sort of topical main lines anyway. But after the move knight e5, I played bishop to d3. Pawn to h5 was played. Here the move king to b1, which is a very normal sidestep to avoid any ideas of bishop coming to h6 later on. Queen to b6 was played, and here I played the move knight to e2, which is a normal retreat for the knight in these type of situations to better place it on f4, where so it puts pressure on this e6 pawn. Now the game continued knight to g4. Here I played the move knight e to d4, the idea being that if black plays the move pawn to e5, the idea being that if I move my knight, then knight f2 would pick up one of the rooks. Then my idea was to play the move pawn to h3 in between, kicking away the knight. Now the knight doesn't have this square on e5 to return to, and if it has to go to h6, then black's pieces are definitely misplaced. So instead, after the move bishop f8 was played, here I spent a bit of time considering a couple of different options. Firstly, I took, and then I was looking at this move pawn to e5, which is a typical, very thematic try in classical Sicilian structures. The idea is to remove this e5 square away from black's knight and also open up our bishop. But after the move bishop h6, bishop check is what I was looking at, and then king to d8. I was looking at knight takes e6 check, sacrificing the knight, and after bishop takes queen b4. But I just couldn't see any concrete way to win after, let's say, bishop to f8. It just looked incredibly messy. It feels like I do have compensation here after a move like knight d4, but it seems very, very messy and unclear. And I wasn't sure what my continuation was going to be there, so I opted for a different move. I went pawn to h3 with a very specific idea in mind. So my idea is that I know black's going to play bishop h6, and I was going to answer this with an unexpected move which I saw over the board. So after bishop h6, I thought my opponent was expecting queen e1 or queen e2, but instead I went for this move queen c3, just offering black to play knight f2 and pick up one of my rooks. Now the idea is that if black plays knight to f2, then I'm going to sacrifice my knight on e6 with knight takes e6, and after bishop takes, if knight takes d1, I just take on f6, and if he takes here, then my idea is to go queen takes f6, king to d7, and here white has a really, really strong move, bishop to c4, and this leads to a winning variation. For example, I'm attacking the bishop and also threatening knight to e5 check. If black captures it, then I have to move knight to e5, king goes across, queen goes to e7 check, king goes to c8, and then I have queen d7 and knight c6 picking up the queen with a winning attack. So this was the main idea. Now after the move queen c3, my opponent, I think, saw this idea at that point, realized he might have missed it, and then went for a different idea instead, played the move pawn to b4, which initially I didn't quite understand, but in the next coming moves I worked out what my opponent was trying to set up, which was quite clever, because after the move queen to b3, knight to e3 was played instead of knight f2. Yeah, at first this was quite confusing, but once you understand what black is trying to set up, then it makes a lot of sense. Knight e3, I played knight takes e6. Now I don't mind sacrificing the exchange here, because after rook takes d1, white gets a lot of compensation on the light squares, and black's position is very weak here. Instead, black played this move rook to b8, and I thought this was very, very clever defense. The idea is that black wants to set up this counter attack with pawn to a5 and pawn to a4, trapping my queen, because the knight on e3 prevents my queen from going to these two squares. Now after the move knight to d4, I spent a long time on knight d4 because I had to see the next move as well, which sets up the defense to this whole entire idea. So pause the video here if you want to spend some time to work out the correct move for white. So for those of you who found the move bishop to b5, this is a very strong reply, and it completely negates black's attack. So after the move bishop to b5, the idea is that after black takes the bishop, so now we can't take the rook because queen e6 is a threat, by the way. But if bishop takes bishop, then we have queen e6 check, king d8. Now we have to be very accurate with our moves. The game continued, knight takes b5, knight takes d1. Now we can take the knight, but then I didn't see any way to continue the attack after rook takes, queen takes b5, queen takes, and king to c8. So you have to be very careful when you're attacking, just to make sure that you're playing the most accurate moves possible. So here I thought the check was a lot more accurate. The idea being if the king stays in the back rank, we will capture the rook, which forces the king up to d7. And now I believe he can take the knight, and this is winning for white. But I thought there was a much easier reply here, which was the move knight to e5 check. After the move knight to e5 check, here if king c8 we take the rook, and actually we can even take on d6 is better. And then after king to c7 we go queen e7 checkmate. So after black captures, the game continued, rook takes d1, king c8, and then white played queen takes h8, and my opponent resigned in view of the following moves. For example, king to b7 is met by knight d6 check, picking up the bishop, and if black sacrifices the queen, we can play queen h7, queen c7, and rook d7 here to win more material. So yeah, this was a very important game for me at the time, because I learned a lot in terms of recovering from a really bad start and keeping myself in a good mindset and a very positive mindset to play the rest of the tournament. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this and learned something from it. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.